Hey there, I'm Sherry Quam Taylor, and you are listening to the Business Behind Fundraising podcast. Now, today we're going to be talking about nonprofit budget best practices. In this whole first season, I really want to share with you all the fundamental work that I do with my clients that sometimes feels like it doesn't have to do with fundraising. But I got to tell you, it's the business behind fundraising. It's the engine that is going to allow you to raise more money. So I hope actually the content in this podcast is a little different than what you're thinking. I hope we address this budget element from a completely different angle. And I hope it's actually a little interesting and fun for you too on a pretty dry topic. I want to start with a question that might feel a little bit silly, but that question is, do your donors actually know you need more money? I know it's a little crazy. You're a nonprofit. How can they not know you need more money? But here's what happens. So after I work with my clients that they learn how to really set up the systems and the structure and start doing the things that are attracting investment level donors, start leading donors to their best gift, there's something that always happens. During a solicitation, during a time when we are really presenting a need to a donor who's maybe given, year upon year, here's what happens. They always say, oh my gosh, I didn't know you needed that. I didn't know you needed me to give that size gift. It happens all the time. I remember exactly this client of mine who had a donor who was giving kind of in that $12,000 range every year. And when we led him to a deep understanding of the budgeted need, which we're getting to, his gift went above six figures. And he said, I didn't know you needed it. You never asked me. So this concept of our donors not knowing we need money is huge. A couple other scenarios that I see so often. So often our donors think, well, don't my tax dollars go to that? Like, doesn't the government fund you? No, it might be a very small percentage of your revenue. They might think you don't need any more money because I saw on the news that you got a gift from a former Amazon's ex-wife or that founder that started the organization. They got a pretty nice house. They must be funding the whole thing. Sometimes it's like, gosh, we used to give to that organization, but I see all these top corporate logos and sponsors on all of their literature. And so I don't know if they need my money anymore. This is a huge problem in nonprofit fundraising. And sometimes we are actually doing the things that keep donors from understanding that we need the money. And that really goes back to some of these budget best practices that I want to talk through today. A huge point that I want you to kind of put right here when we talk about budgeting is this. And when we think of budgeting, we think of the expenses, right? Like, how much is this going to cost? Who am I going to hire? Where do we need to grow? We go straight to the number crunching on expenses. Great. I want you to do that. But remember, that's only 50% of your budget. 50% of your budget is the expense. What's the other 50? It's the income, right? But I find that people spend 95% of their time nitpicking and going through the expenses and making sure every line item is in there and or not in there, and so stressed about the expense side. And they spend very little time on the income side. And so your budget needs 50% of your time put into expenses and 50% of your time put into income. And if you're not doing that, I actually am not going to be surprised if you're struggling reaching or exceeding that budgeted need every year. This is a game changer strategy that you've got to start implementing today if you're not doing this. Now, there's three really common scenarios that I see when budgets come across my plate. I always do this in a kickoff meeting. I really want to understand the numbers of the organization. I want to understand your comfort level with spending, investing, and all those good things. But I also want to know, how do you see the revenue coming in this year? Is it the right kind of revenue? Is the pacing correctly? Are we spending enough that actually allows us to hit that number? And so I want to walk you through these 3 scenarios just to make sure you're not doing any one of these. So in this example, let me use just a $5 million organization so that I don't have to do any math if it comes up on this podcast. So here's the first scenario. Creating your budget based on what you have pledged. This is backwards, right? So many people come to me and I'm looking at their budget and there's a list at the top of all the gifts they have pledged. And those gifts might be government contracts. They might be foundation related. They might be earned income. And then there's like, okay, well, that event. And we kind of think this is what we can bring in. And so, maybe in our example, that's adding up to $5 million. But very quickly, the conversation turns to, but we're not fulfilling the dreams of our strategic plan. We can't ever do this one thing. We need more money. We're struggling with cash flow, big one. And it's frankly because we're basing what we're doing from an expense standpoint on what we have pledged. And that is a disconnect because it doesn't reflect truly what you need. So often we have to have an honest conversation to say, even though you have that 5 million pledged, do you really need 5.2? Do you need 5.4? Do you need 5.6? Oh, and hold on. Whoa, we only have 3 months of money in the bank. We don't have a reserve. We've got to be raising to a different number. And so you cannot only budget based on what's pledged. Now, that you might be sweating. I hear board members sweating when I bring this up. But what I want you to think about is, okay, great. If we do have a $5 million pledged and our true need this year is 5.5, then what do we need to stop doing and what do we need to start doing that actually allows us to raise that, right? We cannot be a slave only to our pledged revenue. The trust building part of this is that you have to invest in learning how to do new things, how to equip your staff to do new things so that you can start bringing in the revenue that your big vision requires, or frankly, even that your budget requires. The second scenario I see is that really robust expense narrative, all the way down to the stamps. Cool. I love that. And then up top, it says charitable gifts. This is a big lump sum number. I get it. You're tracking all the details in your donor management software, hopefully. But here's why that's a challenge. It's a challenge that we're not even seeing a little bit more breakdown, because part of the budgeting process is helping the board not only buy into the expenses, right, that 50%, but also helping them see, like, how would we then, in our scenario, how would we raise to the 5.5? Charitable, one line that says charitable gifts is kind of like, oh, hope this goes okay. I guess we'll just grind harder and do a little more. It doesn't give anybody any context. What I want to happen is I want to make sure that you have fully outlined, I call this in my program a financing plan. We got to do that before we decide what kind of fundraising activities we're doing for the year. How would we actually reach 5.5? What does that look like? What month to month? Donor segment? You got to have the board buy in on the other 50% of the budget, right? If you aren't having them do that, you're kind of giving them a pass. And then I get the why doesn't my board fundraise question. So I want to make sure that it's robust enough that everybody knows here's the plan to spend 5 million and here's the plan to raise 5 million or 5.5, whatever it is, if you're putting that in the reserve. Everybody has to have buy-in from day one of the fiscal year. Otherwise, we have nothing to hold people accountable to. Now, here's the third scenario. Then I actually see this scenario quite a bit. And when I talk about it, you may think, well, it's not really that big a deal, but I'm going to tell you it's a game changer. And it actually is one of the things that really keeps your donors from giving their best gift to you. And so that scenario is, so we have the robust expense layout, and then maybe on the income plan, it's more listing activity, right? It's listing the gala, the 5K, the winter appeal, the spring appeal, the Giving Tuesday, the alumni event. It's more listing per activity versus donor segment. And this is actually a huge issue or kind of influencer, I would say, on when staff are stuck in that spin cycle. Because then if our plan is just to run from event to appeal to event to appeal to event to appeal, then that's what we're going to do. And so often those activities are not attracting larger donors. They might be growing grassroots donors, mid-level donors. Sometimes they attract major donors, but the problem is those donors are rarely giving their best gift at those types of activities. So on our budget, when the board approves it and we see all the activities, that's all they're going to be involved with. If they're not seeing, here's our need for major gifts. Here's our need for mid-level gifts. Here's our need for family foundations, for corporate relationships. Then they don't see themselves helping with those relationships. They see themselves helping with the 5K and the event and all the things. And then we're on the spin cycle. And the number one thing I hear from fundraisers is, I don't have time. And so when we're budgeting from day one based on all of these time-sucking activities, I'm not surprised that is really the challenge. Now, please don't hear me say, don't send me emails that I hate events and appeals. I don't. I love events and appeals, but they've got to play a very specific role in your organization. They cannot take over your whole staff schedule, so you can't even think about pivoting into strategic fundraising or relationship-based gift or your major gifts program. Just be careful that they don't handcuff your staff's time and that your board only sees their role in those types of activities. And so budgeting is expectation setting from the get-go on the income side. When budgeting is done right, your expense side adds up to your income side, including what you want to raise for your reserve, including the numbers that you really do need to invest in, or the initiatives you need to invest in, programs, admin, and fundraising. And this feels scary, but we have to have a plan to raise to or exceed that budgeted need every year. It is crucial in budgeting, and I see this done so wrong so often. Let me show you how this plays out in a donor scenario. So let's sit across from that CFO donor. We've all had them. Who's that numbers person? Who's that, if I were to give you $1 million, what would you do with the money person? The direct question person, the person who wants you to know the answers to the question. And sometimes they're a little bit intimidated by this donor. I love this donor. I love the donor who's going to ask me questions, want to know financially, do we know the answers to what we would do with their money? And so when that donor says, well, what do you need this year, right? What do you need? If we respond with, well, our budget's $5 million and we're hoping to do this and we're hoping to do this, how does that sound? Right? It sounds like we're unprepared. We don't have a true plan in place. Maybe if we hit it, we'll do great things. If you've actually put together your income plan, your financing plan, where you know what you need and you know the path to it, here's how I would want you to answer that question. If they say, what do you need this year? I'm so glad you asked me that. This year we have a $5.5 million need. Could I share with you what that looks like? Right? I want you to strongly pivot into how you're funded, what the plan is, how you'd spend it, what your budget is, how you've been growing. You've got to be able to have those financial conversations. And that all starts with a proper budget. I know, it seems boring. It's my absolute favorite thing to do. You can do this. Even if you're not a numbers person, even if you are a numbers person, you can do this. Now, let me make you aware of the tricky part of this. The tricky part is, if you've never done this before, and you're thinking I'm absolutely crazy for saying you should be raising to 5.5, it feels counterintuitive. We don't have a pledge. We've never done it before. The key question you've got to ask yourself is, what do we need to stop doing so that we can start doing more strategic fundraising initiatives? We can't just add more things to your plate. You have to be intentional about the things you're shifting into and about the activities that you need to move into that helps you secure more unrestricted funds, more flexible revenue, so that you can really accomplish all the amazing plans that you have for the organization. I see leaders make this shift every day, and you can too. Thanks so much for tuning in today. If you've liked what you've heard, if you could take a minute to like, share, or subscribe by hitting the bell, and you can get weekly updates on this content. If you're listening to this on an audio podcast, please take a minute to leave an Apple review. I'll see you next week.